Hello, hello. Welcome to another edition of Unlapped. It's Laurence is here. I'm Nicole. There's some guy in a red shirt. We'll get to him later. Unlapped is presented by Oracle. Right now, Oracle is offering to cut your current cloud bill in half if you move to OCI. See if your company qualifies at oracle.com/unlapped. Remember, if you are watching on YouTube, like this video, like and subscribe. You can find us on the ESPN F1 YouTube channel all season long, all year long. That's where you can find us. That's where you can find all F1 content, actually. If you're listening somewhere else, cool, great, love you. Just hit us up with the 5-star review. Nate, how's your WhatsApp? Did it shut down? Is it working?
I'm I'm looking for this WhatsApp, Nicole. I can't find it. I
I
don't know
sent
if
him a
who
message.
you,
I sent him a message on Friday. We left the podcast last week. You got off
yeah.
early. You left early to get on a plane. I sent you a message on Friday. Hey, I'm here. What's up? Blah blah blah. Nothing. Crickets.
I
Radio
I
silence.
mean, I can't find it. I can't find it. I'm looking for I am here. Can't see it.
Other than the sibling squabble, let's get to that because there was another squabble, and I want to know what our producers have for us this week. And we're going to start with this one because after the DNF in Canada, is Lando out of the running to be a champion in 2025? Nate, I've heard enough from you. I want to start with last.
Okay, well, obviously mathematically he's not. The gap is 22 points. There's still over half a season to go. I think on performance he's not because actually over that weekend, I think he was the faster of the two McLaren drivers. But that leads me to the point where I'm starting to really wonder about his champion credentials. And that's just psychologically. First of all, the mistakes in Q3 left him seventh on the grid. And then, he did well. He did remarkably well in the race, got himself back on Piastri's tail, pulled off that great move into the turn 10 hairpin to set things up. It wasn't quite the done deal, but that's because he's racing against, the same car. Oscar Piastri, we know, is a great racer anyway, but he took him by surprise, and that was the opportunity to make it stick further around the track. And then, of course, we saw what happened. And, all he could do was apologize, which I think tells you everything about that incident and who was to blame. And I don't think any of that was in doubt. But it does make you wonder whether psychologically he's got what it takes to beat Piastri to the title, because it's not just him making the errors. He's up against a guy who at the moment looks flawless. And, that's tricky. That's going to be really tricky. So for me, and this is a bit of a cop-out answer, but I would say, yeah, my concern genuinely now, I've been trying to defend him all these weeks beforehand, but my concern genuinely now is whether he can do it psychologically. And I think it's going to come down to these 4 races before the summer break. If he can get some results in, stabilize things, then he's back in the championship. I'd be happy to kind of back him again going into the second half of the year. But if he continues like this over the next 4 races, forget it.
Yeah, like mathematically, he is not out of it. And there's a genuine possibility that Piastri is going to have a weekend where he doesn't score points as well. Because if we're being honest, it wasn't like it was a great weekend for McLaren. They weren't even on the podium. So it's not like Oscar was on the top step or anywhere and Lando was nowhere. So mathematically speaking, it wasn't the worst possible situation to be in, but you're absolutely right in terms of like one is making mistakes and the other one isn't. Piastri is driving. There were a few times, even on lap 1, where I thought he could have been more aggressive, but he wasn't because why would he be? By the way, I found the profile picture. Oh, wait. Oh, damn it. Is that it?
Looks
Yeah, that
familiar
is
to
it.
me.
So I can't find this message, Nicole, anywhere.
You may
So that's
speak
on
now.
me.
You may
Yeah, yeah,
speak
okay.
now.
Well, we'll unpick this after the pod. I'm really sorry.
It's
Apologies
fine.
to
I,
Nicole
I
and to all our
actually don't
listeners.
care. I'm just giving you loads of
No, I know,
room.
and you're doing very
Loads
well.
of
I
it.
feel I feel I feel awful about it. Um, One thing about Lando that I'll just add to that is on Sunday when we spoke to him after the race, we all know Lando's very self-critical. I've not seen him that self-critical after a race, and he actually when he came up to us, he walked up to where we have you know the pen, Nicole. Obviously, you have the TV pen. Then
Yeah.
we're all kind of corralled in this
Very
corner for the
cozy.
written pen. Yeah, it's pretty when it's hot as well. It's pretty awful. But he walked up and I asked him the first question. He just walked straight up and I was right in front of the microphone and his body language was just it was somebody who had been utterly crushed. It looked like somebody was lacking any kind of conviction about themselves. And I think he actually handled it in quite an admirable way. Often we see people get out of the car and immediately blame their teammate, or the other driver or their teammate or whatever, or the team. I thought it was incredible that he had the wherewithal to be sitting in the car and be like, no, that was my fault straight away. But I think it also revealed where his head is at straight. He knew even probably as he was hitting the back of Piastri, I've made this mistake. The move seemed to lack the conviction that he then seemed to lack in the pen afterwards, and that to
Mm-hmm.
me is the most worrying thing about Lando is that I do respect the way he talks about mental health and his mindset, but I think that he seems to be somebody now who is carrying himself like somebody who doesn't believe maybe he can be world champion. Now, obviously, we don't know. I don't know that for a fact. I don't know how Lando feels about
No.
that, personally. But that's the take I get. And asking him these questions, he was very frank and honest with us back. He's like, I'm not good enough at the moment to be, I'm making too many mistakes to be champion. But I think it's almost like he said that so many times to us. At what point do you start reinforcing that actual belief, that actual fact in your head? And I think that that's kind of the fear I have with Lando going forward is that
Mhm.
Laurence is absolutely right. Lando up until that crash, it was fantastic. The move he'd made on Piastri, they went wheel to wheel, and then it just seemed like in this moment, this split second, he makes the wrong call, and then he sticks to it, and he gets stuck there. And yeah, I think if you were following social media afterwards, the whole chat was that in a nutshell is why Lando's not going to win the championship this year. I still think he's got a chance. Piastri could retire
Yeah.
next week, and Lando could be back in the lead of the championship again. But it's just so difficult to back that, isn't it? Given what both of you have rightly said, there's one driver at McLaren who was consistent and who was carrying himself like somebody who thinks he can be champion, and it's not
Mhm.
Lando. Oscar carries himself like Max. He's just very confident, quite quiet. He's like a silent assassin, isn't he? Goes about things, and even when he has an off weekend, Oscar, his off weekends are usually third, fourth.
Except for
Whereas,
Australia.
yeah, well, that's exactly it. Australia
And
was the
that could
one
happen
where
again.
it could. Then the interesting thing with Australia, when you look at it, is that, and this is where I think it was slightly misleading at the time. Both he and Lando made the same mistake. It wasn't like that was Piastri making a mistake on his own. They both went off at that point in the circuit, and just because of the way they rejoined, Lando got away with it and won the race. Piastri, the punishment was that he finished 10th, didn't he, or ninth in that opening race,
Right. Yeah.
which would have been a 1-2. So
Hmm.
even Piastri's biggest mistake of the season, Lando also made the same mistake. He just got away with it. So I think that's what stood out to me is that Piastri, there's not really a moment where you say he alone made a mistake in that race that Lando didn't. I think he's been at least on a par with Lando, if not better than Lando, since the start of the year. And that opening race, kind of the result, obviously kind of clouded that a little bit. But now in the context of the season we've had, Lando is the one who's consistently making those mistakes.
See, I'm still in the camp where I think, like, I was in the camp where, oh my God, Zach Brown said it, I think in Miami, and he was saying it's unrealistic to expect that these guys won't run into each other at some point.
Mm.
I was definitely in that camp before. I'm still in that camp. No, Lando's not out of it. I would like to see him be a bit more aggressive. I would like to see him make fewer mistakes, and maybe have that killer instinct a little bit more, be a little bit more like the silent assassin, even if that's not actually him personally. But I'm not going to write him off yet. It's only round 10.
Mm-hmm. It's not even halfway yet, is it?
Exactly.
Silverstone,
We're not even
Silverstone's halfway
halfway.
point. Yeah.
They weren't great. And again, maybe I would feel differently if it was a great weekend for McLaren and Oscar won the race. Maybe I would feel
Mm.
differently, but I don't. And I just think that I'm not going to write him off yet.
If it's going to happen, which everyone knew was kind of inevitable because then they're fighting for a championship, this was in a way the best way it could happen because the guy that made the mistake apologized immediately. Actually, almost before his car had stopped moving, he was apologizing over the team radio. It was the guy who made the mistake who paid the price. Imagine if it had been the other way around and
Exactly.
Piastri had gone into
Yeah.
the barrier, Norris had continued taking the 12 points. Then all of a sudden you're dealing with a much more difficult political situation within the team. Did Lando do it on purpose? Was this all part of the plan? Blah, blah, blah. These things start to seed and kind of create a nasty environment. The way that happened, it was like, okay, we knew this collision was going to happen. We got it out of our system. Lando took the blame. Lando took the punishment. So I think McLaren, in a way, have kind of like, testing the waters with this driver rivalry, which I completely agree is not over yet. Will continue to amp up, will likely result in something further down the line, especially if Lando gets more desperate. If he does get to a point where he's still lots of points behind going into second half of the season, he's going to try even wilder stuff. I don't think he was really trying anything. They didn't know what he was doing, but he's going to try wilder stuff. And then that could lead to collisions again. So in a way, I think this is good because, for McLaren actually, because it just kind of just stabilizes things despite what was that obviously something that they didn't want to happen, which was the two cars colliding.
Did Lando deserve to get a penalty for the move on Oscar?
Yeah, the penalty with Lando was weird because he only got a 5-second penalty, which obviously was completely meaningless,
Right.
and no penalty point, which a lot of people pointed out.
Yeah.
The time penalty aspect to it is kind of a quirk of the rules. So I asked the FAA about this, and because he was classified, he completed more than 90% of the race. He gets an in-race penalty instead of one for the next race, which I think is a rule that probably needs to be looked at because I think that's a bit strange that you could probably have an incident at the end of a race and then it not affect you at the next one. I think that's strange. But if that's what the rule is, then that's the rule. The penalty point one will be a talking point, undoubtedly, in Austria because I'm sure Max will have something to say about it. What the FIA said was because there was no immediate consequence to Piastri's race, as you mentioned, as Laurence mentioned with the fallout at McLaren, they downgraded it in terms of severity. Now, I personally think that it probably warranted one. If you look at some of the other collisions that have garnered a penalty point, just a single penalty point, I think Lando was quite lucky not to get one, and it won't help the accusation that the FIA somehow favors you if you're a British driver, which is something I don't agree with at all because you have 20 different stewards that rotate around. There's one in that panel who's British, I believe, and there were no Brits on the panel this weekend. Just for anyone listening to that who thinks this, but I think it's another example of inconsistency, and I think that the idea that it can't be a penalty point because there's no direct consequence to the other driver, I think is a slightly difficult precedent to set, or it's a difficult thing to look at because it shouldn't be based on whether there's a consequence to the other driver or not. And I know they're very, very different incidents, but if you look at the Max Verstappen three penalty points in Spain, I know it was different for what he got the penalty points for, but there was no immediate consequence to Russell in that
Exactly.
case. Russell went on and still finished. If anything, it helped secure the podium for him. So to say that because there was no immediate consequence to the other driver, it's no longer a penalty, I don't see what the logic is behind that because you can still mess up in a big way, as Max did in Spain, and it not affect the other driver, and as Lando did, and again, no one's saying it was a malicious move from Lando, but the penalty points thing exists for a reason. It's to deter people from making those mistakes. So I think absolutely he was lucky not to get one, and I think it's a shame. I think the FIA will rightly have to answer some questions on that. They very rarely put the race director. I mean, they don't anymore put the race director up to face media questions, but this is exactly when they should to explain that because otherwise it just looks like a slightly inconsistent way of giving these things out. Because you're right. I mean, I was in that press conference when Max Verstappen was very angry about being asked about penalty points. I actually asked him a question at the end of the session after qualifying.
Well,
He just put
he
his thumbs.
snapped at you.
Yeah, he put his thumbs up to me and was
Yes.
like, "Yep, yep, all good," which was quite funny. And yeah, so really kind of ticked off about that situation, and then to see that Lando Norris doesn't get one for that, I think he will rightfully turn up in Austria with a bit of a bone to pick about that. And I think whatever he says about it will be justified because when you look at it, not only did Lando Norris not get a penalty in terms of grid for Austria, he didn't get a grid drop of any kind. He also doesn't have a penalty point. So obviously the punishment was he was out of that race. But beyond that, there was nothing. So yeah, I think that that's something that is a fair talking point, and I think that in the grand scheme of things with Norris, he can be very. That's probably a tiny slither of positivity to take out of it. But the fact he escaped without anything is probably one of the few positives to take from the race.
After the race, you've got George up there winning it, and then Red Bull's trying to protest his win, which could be silly politics in one part of it, or it could be gamesmanship in another way, or it's just like the team trying to take their drivers back because they are aware that they've got a guy who's under their driver's skin too.
I think Red Bull just can't help themselves, like any opportunity, especially when it's Mercedes and increasingly George Russell. We saw in Miami as well. They protested his result there for not slowing under yellow flags. I think any opportunity to have a dig at Mercedes or potentially, undermine Mercedes, they'll go for it. I can't believe that they ever thought that would be admissible and would work. Not least because Max Verstappen had said to Sky Sports after the race that all that braking under the safety car was because both George and Max felt the safety car was going too slow. And Max said in his head, he thought perhaps, the safety car was going slow to make sure that they got racing again at the end of the race. But both of them needed it to go faster just to keep the temperature in the tires. So he, even after, all the kind of stuff that happened on track, he said, look, it was nothing. It was just me and George trying to urge the safety cars to go faster. So for Red Bull to then put in the protest, I think they put it in 2 hours after the finish of the race.
Yeah,
we then didn't get a result until 5 hours after the end of the race because the FIA take protests very seriously, as they should,
Mhm.
and they go through every single point. They write it all out in a document for us, and it's almost like getting a legal kind of like transcript from a courtroom or something. You hear, what the arguments were for each side. And so by the time we got to that, it was 5 hours after race. But I was in the UK, so I actually went to sleep not knowing
Good
the
for you.
result of the race, which was probably the case for a lot of people in Europe. I don't think many people would have kept themselves up waiting to find out what happened from that. But it is a bit ridiculous, and I think I go back to what Zach Brown said in Miami when he was kind of critical of the way that Red Bull were questioning the legality of the McLaren, and he said, "Look, if you want to protest, you should put in a proper protest, which of course Red Bull did in Canada, but it should cost you more than the 2,000 deposit. It should cost you a significant amount of money that then comes out of your budget cap, so that teams will only do it if they genuinely think there's something they can get off it." If you listen to Red Bull, Christian Horner spoke about this on Monday at the F1 movie premiere in New York, and he said, "Look, if we think that something was out of hand or wasn't as it should have been, we have the right to protest," which I get, but I can't believe they ever went into that protest thinking genuinely that it was going to be successful. What's more, what one of their arguments, which was that George left too big a gap to the safety car leaving the pits, because the cars were going through the pits because they couldn't go on the pit straight. They just kind of camped because they looked
Yeah, they
into it
dropped
and
it.
it turned out that actually George was complying with a different regulation under the safety car, and therefore that was never going to work either. So yeah, I think it was all a bit petty, and yeah, I agree with Zach that I think it should just be like, right, okay, put
Mhm.
$250,000 on it, then do you still
Mm.
believe it? Because if you win the race, and you get your $250,000 back as a result, then that's great, as a result of the protest. But if the protest gets chucked out, which I think we all kind of knew would happen, then you lose your $250,000 from your development budget.
I'm
Yeah.
here for petty. I'm also here for your drama. I don't want the drama, but I'm here for your drama. But I do like the Zach Brown idea because I think you need to know, you need to be able to know who won the race. And it can't just be
Yeah.
somebody having a temper tantrum over something to put those sort of things in question because I think those situations make the sport at times look like a Mickey Mouse show or a clown show, some sort of circus, and it takes away from everything you just saw on the track. And I personally, I don't love that. So I think if you're going to protest, I love that. Put down a chunk of money. Make it hurt if your protest is just trash. Make it hurt if you're just there for being petty because you can be petty in a million other ways. Don't be petty in a way that takes away from the credibility of what you're actually out there doing week in and week out because then you're just shooting yourself in the foot. As long as we're on George real quick, the rumors that Aston Martin could be offering him a seat. Love the rumor mill. It's my favorite thing. But how realistic is that?
It seems at the moment, I mean, at the moment, it seems unrealistic because for the simple fact that George Russell said after the race as well, and if you talk to people close to him, they say the same thing. His only focus is on signing that new deal with Mercedes. But what is clear is other teams in the paddock are aware of the situation. That is that Toto Wolff hasn't decided yet whether he wants George Russell or if he can get Max Verstappen, whether he'll put him in that seat. And so it makes sense if you're Aston Martin. Well, we've talked about it before. Would this be to replace Fernando Alonso or Lance Stroll? Weirdly, I think it would be to replace Alonso, which kind of doesn't make any sense. But clearly, there's an interest there, and it does sound like that is legit. But Russell's only focus is on the Mercedes deal. In fact, he doesn't even want to talk to other teams and make
Mhm.
it look like, hey, I'm kind of exploring other options. And to be honest, perfect timing for him to win that race in the way he did, because I think we were talking about Lando's mistakes earlier. George really doesn't make many. I can't remember, you know, if you think about mistakes that he's made, even when you look at some of the other top drivers, I think George is almost still quite underrated in terms of how good he is, and I think that he he now mentally is ready for a championship challenge against someone like Max, and so as much as the Aston Martin project is throwing a lot of money at stuff, I don't think he sees his future as anywhere else but Mercedes. And also, like for him, why would you leave Mercedes to join, a team that is, Mercedes have proven that they've come out of an engine regulation before and have dominated. A lot of positive noises about where they're going. Aston Martin, Honda, a lot of money there, but a lot of question marks as well. And I don't think there's any certainty that they're going to be up the front. I think it's quite certain that Mercedes are going to be at least competitive under the new the new regulations. That seems to be what everybody's saying. So for him to make that move at this stage when he's been waiting for a championship car for so long
Yeah.
doesn't make any sense. I think the only way he ends up there is if he's forced there by Max somehow becoming available to Toto Wolff, and that seems unless he gets banned next race, that that might open things up in terms of
I
his
think
contract.
the
But yeah, I don't see it.
answer, I think the answer to you why would he do that question?
Mm.
It's two words or one name. It's Adrian Newey. I
Yeah,
think
potentially.
potentially the Newey question mark. And again, I can't speak to it because I'm not there week in and week out, but we've seen what Newey can do and
Mm.
has done. His track record is there. And I think you look at Aston Martin now as one thing. When you throw in Newey, maybe it's
Mm.
something different. So when you're like, why would he do that? To me, that answer is Adrian Newey.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
but I
fair.
think the smarter move for George would be make sure you get a 1 year contract with Mercedes. Watch Fernando stay there for another year at Aston Martin, and
Mhm.
then potentially, move in there. Don't burn the bridge, but leave it open as a possibility. And if you look at the way Mercedes do contracts, it's almost always around the summertime before the next year that they get it sorted, which I've never fully understood because I actually prefer, if I was a driver, I prefer the way McLaren do it, where they're kind of signing contracts for 2 years down the road. But Mercedes almost always do this. They did it with Lewis as well. They did it with
Yeah.
Valtteri consistently. They just wait until that summer before, and then usually you get an announcement around Monza time. So I don't think there's anything untoward at the moment about the fact that there's no contract signed. I think it's just a case of they're letting the races get out of the way, and then they'll have a proper sit down in August.
Mm.
It is time now for our stat of the week. Stat of the week is brought to you by Oracle. Right now, Oracle is offering to cut your current cloud bill in half if you move to OCI. See if your company qualifies at oracle.com/unlapped. I personally would like to know how Kimi Antonelli did on his final exams in school. I think it's delightful and delicious that this is actually a sentence I just said because he is just a child. But Kimi Antonelli finished on the podium. He was so cute. It was also only his 10th career start. And I think, was it last week that we asked the question, which rookie is more
Mm.
impressive?
Yeah, we said Hadjar, didn't we?
Right, we did. It's
Yeah.
the fewest starts by an Italian before their first podium, by the way, since 1966. We asked the question if Hadjar was doing more with less and therefore was more impressive. But I also think we did make the comment that some of the mistakes that was making, it wasn't actually on him. It was things that were happening to him. Therefore, like he couldn't control the engine issue. That's
Mm.
just, that's just the way it is. But how impressed have you been with him, particularly his podium performance in Canada?
Yeah, massively so. I mean, what was it? Driver of the day in that second race. In those first couple of races, it was super exciting. Everyone was
Which was
super,
wild.
super through it. Yeah, which was kind of hilarious as well because he had that response where he's like, "Really? Like me?" But I think that there is this growing sense of excitement around Antonelli, and yeah, I thought he was fantastic. I mean, obviously George took all the plaudits out in front, but that was a race for a young driver. You mentioned it then, Nicole. 10 race starts. There was so much there that he could have got wrong during that race. You had the two McLarens behind him. It was, does he? It was almost a race where he could have got sucked into trying to chase Max and destroyed his tires. There was the threat from behind. I mean, there was that great bit when he's in the cool down room and he was saying to Oscar and to Max, he's like, I didn't know which. Sorry, to George and to Max. I didn't know which of the McLaren drivers to give DRS to, so I kind of went in the middle of as they're coming down the back straight. But it shows you, that he's dealing with a lot of these things in quite an endearing way. He's approaching all these moments as a rookie who's like, I don't really know what the best thing to do here is. I'm just going to go on instinct. And I love watching him race. I think it's great. And it was that there was a moment when Lando and Oscar were fighting. You thought maybe if Lando gets him here, maybe he could catch Antonelli in the final laps, just given how his pace was. And for him to do it and for him to tick that off, I think that's always a big moment for a young driver. Is
Mhm.
tick that first, it's that first of everything off, isn't it? When you get the first win, the first pole, it always kind of levels you up a bit. And yeah, he's fantastic, and I love his radio messages at the end as well. Like he was kind of hyperventilating and just couldn't believe it. And it's so nice when you hear drivers showing that kind of emotion.
Mhm.
And what's crazy about Antonelli, he's going to be on that podium so many times in his career. He looks so good. Obviously, I think Toto Wolff talked coming into the year, didn't he? So there's going to be lots of very big highs and very big lows. And actually, I don't think the lows have been that low. There've been a few things in comparison to Russell that have been low, but kind of acceptably so for a rookie. And his highs are just getting better and better. So yeah, I was so impressed with him, and I think by the end of the year, it'll be interesting to see where he is relative to George, because George is a very high benchmark for him, and he's already, he's looking like he's not too far away, on some weekends. So yeah, massively impressed, and I think he's gonna, could he win a race by the end of the year? I mean, you wouldn't put it past him now if he can
No,
get
I
that
wouldn't even.
consistency sorted out, and the Mercedes car seems to be getting better week to week. So yeah, I think there's some great things coming from him.
Yeah, I mean, to win a race, you've got to remember he's got to beat George Russell, which is
But that's
a
true.
very high
Yeah,
benchmark. But the fact that you're mentioning that and the fact that it doesn't seem completely absurd
Mhm.
does show you the level that he's operating on. And then when we talk about the comparison with the other rookies, Isaac Hadjar being the obvious one who's really been very impressive. It again is that teammate comparison. Liam Lawson, I think, is probably in one of the worst places in his career to date
yeah,
because of what happened at the start of the year, getting booted out of Red Bull, trying to reset, find his feet, and he just doesn't seem to be finding it. Meanwhile, Hadjar's, on a spiral upwards and Lawson's on a spiral downwards. What's more, it does appear to be a car, that Racing Bull, that is forgiving, that is actually quite performant. It's actually a pretty solid qualifying car, certainly. So when Hadjar gets it right, it looks exceptional. But he's not racing in the same league as Antonelli is. He's not in among those front runners, and he's not got a teammate like George Russell, who, I think at the moment is showing all the hallmarks of put him in the right car and he's going to challenge to be a champion.
You look at what Ferrari is doing now. You're like, well, it's another weekend, it's another botched strategy. It's another weekend where Ferrari just didn't do what we think that they can do. And all the rumors about Vasseur's like job situation and them blasting the Italian media saying this is ridiculous. Both drivers basically did the same thing. My question is, why point to him? I realize that everything rolls downhill and he's the big guy. But if they get rid of Fred, are they actually making Ferrari better?
I don't think so. I think this is the issue they face. Is one, who do you replace him with? Is there someone lined up to replace him? Not that I'm aware of. And, I think that would be an issue. This year as well, there's this kind of luxury in a way that the rules completely change next year. If you take Fred out now and replace him, even if you replace him with someone exceptional, like a Total Wolf, whatever, to get the team all working as it should in time for 2026, and if they have got the ingredients for 26 to be competitive, that could also fall apart just because you have the wrong person at the very top. So that's why I don't think Fred's job should be at risk. But this is Ferrari. I mean, as we've mentioned before on this podcast, Nate had written a book on Ferrari and the reasons why they haven't won a world championship since 2007, 2008 for the constructors. And sometimes it is, I think, throwing the baby out with the bathwater. It's just,
yeah.
losing the good bits along with just, reacting to this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong. But I think they have to wait to 26. Okay, if 26 is a disaster, if it's like 2014 when they went into that regulation change and they were nowhere, sure, I think, Fred's position is absolutely under threat, as it probably should be. But right now, it would be madness, in my opinion, to get rid of Fred.
I think as well, if they do go into next year and it's a disaster and they're off the pace, Fred's position, I think, yeah, you're right. You'd have to look at it, but I think there's still a deeper questions about Ferrari, right? You would say, how is it again that you've had a several year lead into a rule change, and you've kind of been caught out. You haven't produced what your rivals have produced, and that would, I think, there's deeper issues than who is just leading the team. Is it a resources issue? Is it a mindset issue? Is it, are there forces at play that affect the wider team? One of the things that I spoke in the book about when I spoke to Inaki Rueda, who used to be head of strategy, was much maligned when he was there, and I have to say, is doing a great job in the same role at Sauber at the moment, because he's been calling some absolutely superb races that Nico Hulkenberg's been executing really, really well to score a lot of points. He said one thing he noticed when he was at Ferrari was when a team is kind of siloed away developing a car for the new season, they're fantastic because they're not swayed by the pressure. They're not swayed by what the media is writing. They're like, right, we're just in a box here. It's the team working on the current car that get misled by the politics of the higher ups. They get misled by the politics of, middle management. They get misled by, by the media talking like they are right now about this needs to happen, this needs to happen. And then snap decisions gets made, like getting rid of Fred Vasseur, like changing the development course that they're on. So his theory, and he was there for a few years. He went through two different rule cycle changes. He said there's nothing actually wrong with Ferrari in how it goes about preparing for new rule changes. It's how everything externally affects the day-to-day decision making. And I think it was a really smart way of looking at that team, and kind of you can look at that from the last couple of years. And so to that point, getting rid of Fred, I mean, I don't see what it would do. And Formula One is not like the NFL or the Premier League, where you have loads of out of work managers who have won a World Cup or have won a Super Bowl, and it's like, hey, I'm here, guys, if you want me. If you're Ferrari, your options really are, Laurence mentioned one of them, Toto Wolff, Christian Horner, who has been in the news, and I think those stories about him going to Ferrari were very well timed in terms of his position at Red Bull. I think it just was, I don't think there was much to that, even though he gets on very well with John Elkann. You really don't have that. There's talk of, and the name has completely escaped me, the guy who's just led Ferrari to a third straight Le Mans
Oh,
24
the guy
hours
in Le
title.
Mans. Yeah.
Yeah, and I should know his name, but
So
it's
should I.
escaped from me. But yeah, exactly. But like Le Mans, the WEC, the World Endurance Championship, is such a different proposition to Formula One. Just the idea that because you're successful there, you're going to be able to come over to Formula One and suddenly win. Very short-sighted. I'm sure that there's a lot of talented people that come over and can do that, but it's so different. So yeah, I don't think there's an answer there. And the worry I have now is that all of this pressure will lead to Ferrari making snap decisions now, even if they keep Fred being kind of lent on a little bit to make decisions now about the car they're developing for the rest of the season, but also the car they're developing for 26, that they make purely because of this pressure that then has a negative impact next season. And then we're back to square one in March, April, May, whatever, when Ferrari are off the pace. And they're like, oh, this is because we reacted to whatever was happening 12 months ago. And it's the same story with Ferrari over and over again. So Fred, to his credit, I like the way he came and responded to it. He has to just be the shield against all of that and say, we're not changing course, we're doing this. And John Elkann above him has to back him. I mean, John Elkann is the guy who put him in charge. So hopefully they see sense and keep him. But this is Ferrari we're talking about. It could change very quickly. I don't know.
One, it's wild to me that you can be in a position in Formula One like Ferrari and have outside forces be that
Mm.
influential. You're in one of the most coveted situations in motorsports, period. End of story. Stop talking. That is it. You are leading Ferrari, which means you have the history, you have the pedigree, you're not new. They didn't bring in a rookie to be their team principal. So I feel there should be some level of, I know how to deal with this. It's wild to me that someone could go out there and be like, you're not doing a good enough job. And all of a sudden, you're going to change course because you feel the pressure. In that position, you should be impervious to the pressure. So it's wild
Yeah.
to me that that's even a conversation. But the big thing for me is if you're going to make a change, you have to make a change that makes you better. Getting rid of him now for a variety of reasons, but one of them being his relationship that he has with the drivers, you
Yeah.
can't do that. You're not making the team better if you get rid of him. You are immediately making the team worse. If you want to bring in the wet guy, and we should know his name, but we can't remember it, and that's fine. But like if you're
But that,
going
that
to
says a lot as well, right? Like,
right,
he's not a name. He's
but
not a
if you're
name in
going
the
to
same way.
bring him in and start, for lack of a better word, grooming him within the Formula One program. And maybe someday when Fred wants to step away, or you really legitimately do need to make a change, then you've got your guy in the position and he's been in the environment. But making that change now seems just asinine to me.
Fred Vasseur was the hero of Maranello, who brought Lewis Hamilton in. The
Yeah.
whole vibe around that team was so different. And I realized that, that's part of why the Italian media have turned against them so much, because the expectations were built so high. But, Fred is building something there over time. And I think really as well, you've got to look at the fundamental like mistakes that they've made with this car. And the reasons why, the processes why they led that way. It seems like it's unable to run in its happy place in terms of, its ground, its ride height and getting the floor to work. They had a big change in front suspension, but they did all that for good reasons. They did it for reasons which basically they felt that their previous car concept had hit a ceiling, and therefore they needed to make a change. Now, clearly, that change hasn't yielded the results they wanted, but you've got to look at the reasons for that. And I think, it's if you look at the successful teams, the teams that have been rooted over years and years and years, and continue to fight for world championships. In the modern era, you got Mercedes with Toto Wolff at the top, and very much a no blame culture over time, where if there are issues, then you look at the reasons for it and you do that rather than just going on a firing spree. And then you look at Red Bull. Christian Horner has been there since the moment Red Bull started up. They've had highs, Sebastian Vettel era of winning championships, lows, highs again with Max Verstappen. These things can turn around when you start to focus in on what the issues are. And then even if you look at McLaren right now, it's been built on stability. Zach Brown came in, started to look at, the various areas that he needed to find improvements. They cycled through a few team principles for sure, but when they found Andrea Stella, they realized this is a guy we need to back. This is a guy who's got the backing of the factory, of the engineering departments, also understands those engineering departments, could start to put things in the right place, and they move forward. And now they're going to probably win both world championships this year. So that's that's how you build success in F1. And I think, considering Fred's relatively short tenancy in that job, to get rid of him now would be madness.
I do want to get your thoughts on a couple other things. It seems like there's been a lot of track news lately. Vegas was extended, Montreal was extended. The FIA just approved the plans to upgrade the Kyalami circuit, which is in Africa. And like we all know, we've heard Lewis talking for years that it's a priority for him to get a race back in on the continent of Africa. But also the news out of Thailand, they just committed $1 bajillion, give or take, to try to bring a track there as well. So when you look at some of the track news, the changes, like Imola is off, you've got the Madrid race on the schedule. How realistic is it for one, Thailand to get a race, but also two, for a race to go back onto the continent of Africa?
I think the Thailand one is very realistic. F1's been keen on that for some time. There's always difficulties with getting things past governments and everything, but the Thai cabinet have now lent their backing to the plans. So it seems like everything is making the steps that it should towards a race. What's more, they're not saying, oh, it's going to be on the calendar next year, like we've seen with some other races in the past that have failed to make it happen. They're saying 2028. That seems like a reasonable amount of time to get things right. It's going to be a street race. I'd love to know actually what our listeners think about street races. I know a lot of kind of purist fans hate them because they'd rather be racing on proper racetracks. Madrid hasn't been received particularly well from what we've seen of it, but that's what's on offer. And I think actually Bangkok could be a really cool place to host a street race. It's not bang in the center of Bangkok, but still, I think it could be an interesting place to do it just because it's such a different type of city, and also a brand new country for F1 to visit. And then, F1 has made no secret of their desire to go back to Africa, but quite understandably, Stefano Domenicali said, we've got to do it right. We've got to do it with a partner that can commit long term so that we're not just there for 2 or 3 years. I think back to the Indian Grand Prix. I attended that 2 of the 3 years, and such a shame that, it couldn't make it work, but really it was kind of set up to fail. It was the right things were not in place to make it happen. I think F1 has learned those lessons a long time ago and is now looking to make sure that the place that it ends up is the right place. So Rwanda was talked about, looking less likely now. And then Cape Town, another street track in Cape Town is a possibility. But I'm really infused about Kyalami. I think it would be a great circuit to go back to. F1 used to race there. 1993 was the last time it did. The circuit, in order to get this grade 1 license, isn't going to have to change a huge amount. So it's still going to have that old school nature of a circuit. And then to be racing on the African continent, I think is something that F1 does need to target and is targeting for good reason.
You mentioned the phrase purist F1 fans. I do feel like purist fans tend to not like a lot of things. And they're really going to hate the F1 movie.
But I think with good reason. If you look at some of the street circuits that have come on, they haven't been great. But places like Las Vegas, Baku, I think having a calendar which has a few of those, you don't want every race to be like that. But if you've got 4 or 5 in a 24 race calendar, that's actually a really good thing. The Madrid one is what was popping in my mind when I was saying that the purists don't like it so much, and I kind of agree with them on that. From what I've seen, it doesn't look particularly spectacular. I mean, the great thing about Vegas is that you're going past all the things that people associate with Vegas. You're going down the strip. It's a
But also,
fantastic
legitimately,
spectacle.
think back to the first year. The race in Vegas was actually great. Last year wasn't.
Yeah,
George still kind of ran away with it and ruined it a little bit. But the first year, the racing in Vegas was one of the best races of the season.
yeah, and I think it will
Yeah,
continue
without a
to
doubt.
be just because it's an outlier track as well. It's unusual
Mhm.
layout, cold conditions because they host it pretty much in the middle of the night, as we all know. So all those things I think are great. To have one of those on the calendar is what you need. But if you're bringing new street circuits, I think they've all got to bring something that a little bit special, and that's why I quite like the idea of Bangkok because I think it would. I think Bangkok is a, I
Mhm.
don't know if you guys have been, but it's a wild city. It's a great fun place to be. So I think it could bring that to the F1 calendar.
You say Bangkok, and all I can think of is The Hangover. We won't
All
we
I can
won't
think
go
of is my
there.
I think
hangovers
that's what
back in
most people
I
think
2009.
of.
know. That's
Yeah.
all I
Yeah.
can think of. I do want, speaking of movies, we call this a transition. Only one of us has seen the F1 movie, correct? Like you haven't
That
seen it,
is
right,
correct.
Les?
No, I've not seen it yet.
Nate, without spoiling it.
Yep. I'll try my best.
I don't even like what did you think?
So I've been thinking
No.
through this pod what I'm gonna say. I you mentioned just then that purists don't like a lot of things, Nicole. I think you're right. If you look at how fans react to Star Wars is now and Marvel and all that stuff, there's more people who'll sit there being like, I hated this because this didn't happen and stuff. I thought the movie, first of all, it's thoroughly entertaining, whether you're a ardent fan, like lifelong fan, or you've never seen Formula One. The racing scenes in it are unbelievable. I would say to everyone, if you're going to go see it in IMAX. Is what we saw it. We were given a screening in Canada at the IMAX cinema in Montreal, and then we
Is that
spoke
what
to
you were doing when you didn't reply to my message?
that was Thursday night, so that was
Oh,
before. I was so
still
overwhelmed
haven't
with the
figured it out
movie.
yet.
I was so overwhelmed with the movie, I didn't get back to you the next day. That's a good line actually. I can run with. To be honest, I it's not going to be a movie I'm going to say is my favorite racing movie ever. I don't think, because I think Rush or yeah, I thought Rush was fantastic. But again, it's a movie that takes a lot of creative licenses at a lot of different places. Just it has a lot of historical stuff in it. There's definitely my take on it, and this is for other people to make their own minds up. The script to me felt like throwaway stuff that was linking race scene A to race scene B, and that's fine because if you watch Top Gun Maverick, which is what Joe Kosinski did as well, which I love, I think it's a fantastic movie. If you actually dig deep into the script of that, it's not really much to it. It's pretty basic. The storyline's pretty cliched, and then the action scenes are fantastic. It's the one thing, and this is where I think it's interesting. The one thing Formula One and the movie makers have said time and time again is that this is meant to be an authentic racing movie, and I think that that's potentially where the movie falls down because if you keep saying that that's what it is, there's definitely things of this that aren't authentically F1, which I actually think is fine for a film. It's not meant to be a documentary, but they've set it up in
Stole
that
my
way as
line,
well.
damn it.
Sorry. Um, I think you mentioned that before we started as well, so it's clearly in my head. But I thought, look, very entertaining film. There's a lot wrong with it. I think it's very, it's very corny, very cheesy. But at the same time, it's a racing film, and I think that the one thing you'll get from it is if you're somebody who loves Formula One and has followed it for a long time, it will feel a bit like a glorified advert for Formula One, and it will feel like it's not completely accurate to the sport that you watch every Saturday and Sunday. But I think that it's not made for those people. They've said that time and time again. It's not made for me or for Laurence or for you, Nicole. Like, it's
Mhm.
kind of this audience is I forget the guy's name. Eddie Q was the executive from Apple. He said that from the test screenings they've had, 18% of people who have gone in with the knowledge have ever watched an F1 race. So that's a huge amount in the US. I think it's about 50% in the UK, and in Europe, it's a bit more around 50%. But they're saying that the people who are coming out who hadn't seen Formula One are blown away by this film. By the scenes, by the racing, by the drama, by the all the things that we've seen with Drive to Survive. So for me, I thought, and those scenes are fantastic. The racing scenes has done so well. Some of them are a bit over the top, and there's one crash scene that I know I've been told the drivers all laughed at when they watched it in Monaco because it's ridiculously over the top. But it is based on a real life crash, so take from that what you will. Um, so yeah, I enjoyed it. I think I want to go see it with other people and see their reaction to it, both F1 fans and not F1 fans. Um, But there was one thing I will say is Formula One seemed to be offended by the idea that anyone dislikes this movie, which I don't like. Like we all came out and they said, "Did you love it?" And I was like, "Yeah, I enjoyed it." I was like, thought it was a bit, script was a bit
It's
hokey, and
Hollywood.
yeah, exactly. It's like you're allowed to dislike a movie. What I will say with this, and I'm no movie expert, I like Brad Pitt in a lot of things. He absolutely has phoned it in this movie. He is just there to drive cars fast, which he did, and then the stuff in between, he does not look like he cares. He's trying to play a very cool Brad Pitt
Yeah.
character. Doesn't come off well. Damson Idris is fantastic. I really like him in it. Javier Bardem is great in literally every movie I've ever seen him in, and he's good in this.
Yeah.
So like, there's some good stuff. Kerry Condon's very good. But yeah, it's just I don't know. It's one where how much you enjoy the movie will depend on what mindset you go in with. Laurence and I were talking about this. For me, I found it very difficult to park my F1 journalist hat on the
Yes.
table, and we were also there, kind of watching it critically because we were talking to Bruckheimer and Krasinski the next day, and they made the reference. I think they were expecting us to stand up a bit like in the Cannes Festival and give it like a round of applause at the end, which we didn't do. We all kind of left like gossiping amongst each other, and they said at the start, Jerry, there was a bit of tension in their briefing with us because they clearly had been told there's a lot of skepticism about this film. Some of them didn't really find it that great. They were very defensive, and they were like, "We, you guys are the hardest guys to please." And I was like, "Yeah, I mean, but we're not movie critics either. Movie critics are going to think one thing, F1 guys are going to think another." So I think it will do very well commercially. But is it the most authentic race movie ever made? No.
Hmm.
Does it need to be? No. But should they have said
But
it was?
Nate,
You said that.
here's my question: is it a good movie? Is it actually good? Because I read the Times, the UK Times,
Yeah, that's really
review of
good.
it, and the headline was Brad Pitt stars in the corniest, dumbest sports movie yet. And I mean,
Yeah,
it's a great review, like in terms of its
it's
entertainment
really
to read.
good.
But the concern that I had there was like, well, if it's not for us, as in like hardcore motorsport
Yeah.
fans, that's fine. I get that. It's to bring in new fans. But what if those people, watch and they're like, this is the dumbest, corniest movie I've ever seen. So
Mm.
is it a dumb and corny movie? Because if it is, I think then that's where F1, they don't get the new fans that they're hoping for, and they don't
Yeah.
please the existing fans. And
But
actually
see,
it
they
ends up
will. But
nowhere in
they
between.
will get new fans out of it. They will. It's the same concept as the Drive to Survive fan. We found
But
the
but
we
but
found
it,
the end of
but if it's
Netflix.
but Drive to Survive had issues, but it also, you could understand why it was good. This is what I'm asking Nate: is this a movie
Yeah.
that is gonna convert? Or are people gonna go into it and say this just felt like a huge, like I've heard like Heineken commercial, or like promoting
Oh.
sponsors, or just promoting F1 itself? Does it just feel like that? Are people gonna see through it?
I think it's in you're right about that review because that review is fantastic. I recommend everyone go and read it. It definitely, I think dumb is a fair word. It's not a word I would have chosen, but when I read it, I was like, the storyline is you could predict the storyline the moment you walk in there. It is the
Mhm.
most obvious movie and the most obvious ending to a movie you're ever going to see. So in that sense, it's pretty dumb. I mean, a lot of sports movies tend to kind of be along that line. And I think where the thing, and this is, and Nicole, I think it's interesting about Drive to Survive. Drive to Survive is about a real thing. It is kind of lifting the veil a bit on what's real underneath. The one thing I'd say about the movie is I obviously was watching it as a Formula One journalist, watching it in an F1 media screening of it. So it was weird to if you watch something like I don't know, I'm trying to think of other examples. You watch Remember the Titans, or you watch Rush, for example. Rush is categorically is a good film. You watch that movie, the character development's great, the story makes sense. It's obviously historical. You know where it's going. F1 does lack some of that, and I think it sounds like they had so many different stories that were just cut out of it. It does feel a bit disjointed, and like I said, it feels like all just feels like a vehicle for the racing scenes in there. So, is it a good movie? I would say no. I love good bad movies, though. I would say it's in one of those categories. Very very well made,
So
but
would you
probably
say?
bad movie, and
Good,
that's
bad
fine
movie.
because I think I know two people I want to go see it with who I think will love the hell out of it. I think they'll just be like, this is the right amount of cheesy, the right amount of corny. It's enjoyable for that reason. There's a lot of lines in there where literally the scene is happening, and you're like, he is going to say that. When you're like, he's going to say. It's like when in every rock movie, there's a movie The Rock did called Skyscraper, where there's a burning skyscraper and it falls down, and he has to save everyone in it. And there is a scene at the end where he's on a helicopter flying out, and the guy says to him, "What do we do now?" And when I watched it, I said, "Rebuild." And The Rock turns to him and goes, "We rebuild." It's like that. It's like you know what the scene is going to be. There's a bunch of those in this film, but then I think movies now more and more are becoming kind of paint by numbers, aren't they? Like if you
Yeah.
look at them, there's a lot of that now. So I don't know. Like it feels very much like a modern movie. 10, 20 years ago, I think there'd have been a lot more substance to this. Um, but obviously for Formula One, it was great because there was so much access, and I would say the one thing they did very well, I think, is it's set in Formula One, but it's not a, it's about Apex GP, the fictional team, and the window dressing is Formula One around the surface. I think they do that very well, and they jump into the world of Formula One, then they jump out to the fictional world of Apex pretty well for most of it. There's a few bits that don't work so well, but for the most part, they did that in a really, really cool way, whereby you don't really, it's not like you have to know who's driving for the other teams. You hear the name Verstappen at one point, Sonny Hayes kind of references on the radio, like, oh man, this guy's really good, as he's trying to fight him in Bonza. But you don't really need to know what's going on there. So they do that quite well, and I think that's where the movie side of it, the creative license. But also, just sorry, I'm ranting about this film, but the other thing I keep telling people who are kind of overly criticizing it is, from the very beginning, the concept is Sonny Hayes comes back to racing after 32 years out. Like from the get go, you've got to kind of suspend your disbelief for that alone. So that once you see that bit, you're like, okay, that clearly, the premise of this movie is a bit fanciful. That's fine. A guy like Brad Pitt can get it. It's like Tom Cruise in movies.
Yeah.
You're like, you can get away with doing that with a guy like him.
It's not
So
for us.
yeah,
It's not. I don't think this movie is not made for us. And
mm,
like you're too close to it. Lawrence is too close to it. I'm
probably yeah.
I'm too close to it. It feels a little like it's a Driven part two. Remember
Mm,
Driven? Sylvester
Yeah.
Stallone, where he's like he's not been in the sport. He's the old guy that comes back to teach the new guy. And he's like, oh, they still got it because he's going out there on his qualifying lap and he's picking up the quarters with his tires. And then the new guy gets it's been a really long time since I've seen the movie, but um the new guy is having like some sort of temper tantrum and they get into the show cars and they're driving the city streets. So
without helmets, right?
right,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah, yeah,
Something
yeah.
stupid like that. And the manhole covers come up, which is very Vegas, but follow me on that.
It was
The whole
actually very,
point
yeah,
of it
very
is
ahead of its time.
it's like exactly, it was ahead of its time. But the point is, it's like it's a movie and it's
Yeah.
not a documentary. So it's not going to be 100% based in reality. It's if it was a documentary and this stuff was happening, then we'd have some issues, but it's not. So what's the point of it? Is it to entertain people? Is it to make people laugh? Is it to get people to the box office? I think it's going to
Mm,
do that. I think there are going to be enough people, including our group, that are it's too close to it. We're going to go out of curiosity.
yeah.
I want to see it because I'm curious about how it was shot. I'm curious about those race scenes. I am not
Mm,
curious at all about the storyline. I know exactly what's going to happen
yeah.
before you even
The,
started talking. I like it's the tale as old as time. It's not new. It's not groundbreaking. Is it a commercial for Formula 1? Yeah, it is. But I think what's going to come out of this is before 2020 you had your F1 fans and things like that. And yes, like the way Liberty Media has gone about doing the social media strategy, they were already bringing in a new group of fans. They were already approaching the sport differently. Then 2020 happened and everyone found the end of Netflix and you had old fans, new fans, and then you had the Drive to Survive generation of fan. And that has sort of brought in a new audience. So if you've got people, what was the number you said? Like 18% of the audience who had gone in to see it
18, yeah.
had never even seen a Formula One race before. Cool. That's what's going to happen is you're going to get people who go see this movie because
Mm,
either they think Brad Pitt's hot or whatever, and they're curious about it. So they're going to go in, they're going to see the movie. And then after that, they're going to tune in and watch Formula One for a few races. My question is this: Drive to Survive, because it was based in reality, and because it introduced you to real people on the track and gave you storylines to follow, you had a reason to continue to watch it. You had a reason to continue to
yeah.
watch the racing because this is a cute commercial with very cool race scenes, but it's not based in reality. So after you get a new fan who goes in, watches the movie, and is like, cool, I'm going to watch the race in England now. I'm going to watch the race in Austria or whatever, wherever we are on the circuit. When reality doesn't match up with the movie, does that fan stick around? Does that
Yeah,
fan actually become a fan or are they like, no, cool,
yeah.
I'm out. The movie was good.
This is where I think we won't know, right? I think the most logical thing here is people watch this film, and then the first port of call will be they go and watch Netflix, and they'll go and watch Drive to Survive if they haven't seen it, assuming they haven't seen it already. So I don't know, like I never know when people see a film, they then go and say, "Hey, I want to go do that thing." But it's just going to open awareness. A lot of people, I mean, we kind of laughed and joked about the fact that this was called F1 and had the F1 logo in it. But from a purely from an awareness point of view, there are so many people that will be like, I don't know what Formula One is, especially in America, right? Like where you got NASCAR, IndyCar. People say, oh yeah, like I know, you know, the racing that they do in the ovals and stuff like that. I think just raising the awareness to it. If you've got people following drivers now, I think that where the difference, where I find it harder to see how they'll make new fans in the same way. Drive to Survive, why that was so successful was fans watched it and immediately grew attached to Daniel Ricciardo or to McLaren or to they were obsessed with Toto and Christian having beef or Christian and Cyril having beef in season one. This one, because as I mentioned, it keeps Formula One, I think, quite smartly at arm's bay for the movie. You don't really like. There's a couple cameos, but you're not going to know who those people are. So I think it's more about the awareness it brings. Whether the fascinating thing will be Formula One, I'm sure in a year will tell us this many people watch the movie and then watch their first race after seeing the movie. That will be interesting to see if that actually happens. I don't know whether things are like that or not nowadays. Especially with younger people. But if it opens up people's mind, if that 18% suddenly becomes, I don't know, 60% off the back of it. The other thing that was interesting, Jerry Bruckheimer said from his test screenings, and you think about the movies Bruckheimer's produced, he's never had such a favorable rating in the category of would recommend this to a friend. He said it was 80%, which it was very, very high. And for Bruckheimer, he said, none of the movies I've done have ever come close to that. And you think some of the movies he's made are like I would recommend a bunch of Jerry Bruckheimer films to a friend on the first viewing. So the idea that and again, I don't, that's just him saying that. I have no reason to believe that's not true. But so again, it's hard to say, isn't it? If that's a crowd of people that aren't familiar with Formula One, they're watching it and saying, "Hell yeah, I'd tell a friend to go watch that," then that probably speaks volumes. But probably more about if it's an enjoyable summer blockbuster or not versus is this the new Citizen Kane of racing films? It's not going to be that.
No, but it
Yeah,
has to be a good movie because if you sit through 2.5 hours of a movie and you leave and you think I wasted my time, are you then
yeah,
going to
true.
turn on the TV and watch F1? I think it's insulting people's intelligence a bit to be like, just because we've made a Hollywood movie, people are going to flood towards F1. No, it
That's
needs to
fair.
be a good movie, and that was kind of what I was trying to get at. It's like, is this a
Yeah.
good enough movie to get people interested? Now, if what Jerry Bruckheimer said about that test audience is true, then it sounds like it is, and then I think that will inevitably grow F1's audience. But I think, yeah, it's just creating something, and therefore everyone's going to be on board. I think it's naive. It has to be good. And from what I've read, some people seem to think it's pretty entertaining, good movie. Others are quite critical. So anyway, I'm going to reserve judgment until I
I've
see it.
never.
But I tell you
What are
what,
you?
Yeah,
having read all the reviews, I want to see it more than ever right now because
yeah, yeah.
I
Well,
don't know where it's
that's
going to land.
There's like a morbid curiosity.
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. Yeah,
I've
yeah,
never
yeah, yeah.
used I've never used the word good to describe it. I don't think I'd say good, but I will say from the beginning to the end of the film, I found it entertaining. I was like, this is again some
That's
parts
good.
of it because the script was hokey, but like the racing, genuinely, there's some racing scenes in this that are unreal. And for a little Easter egg for anybody listening, there is a scene at the end where Brad Pitt and Damson Idris actually filmed with George Russell and Charles Leclerc at Abu Dhabi on track after testing, and they did a bunch of laps, and they were on cold tires because they weren't driving as quick. There are some lockups and stuff in those scenes that the two drivers make that are legitimate that they were making because they're on cold tires. They came back and one of the drivers, I'm not going to say which one. I mean, not that it now it's happening. One of the drivers came back and said to Kaczynski, "I'm so sorry I ruined your shot with that lockup," and Kaczynski was like, dude, no, you didn't at all. Like, we're keeping that in the film. We couldn't have planned that any better. So stuff like that, I think, is really cool because you're watching it and some of the scenes are CGI'd, like they've put the Apex GP car on top of another car, but some of them you know when it's real, and those are the best scenes by far because they're unreal, and the way they convey the speed and the movement and kind of the pressure in the car is, I think that's to me what was entertaining and enthralling about it. So good. I'll reserve judgment. It won't put it in my best films I've ever seen category, but definitely watched it and was entertained and thought I'm going to tell my friends to go watch it and see what they think.
See,
That
I'm
would be
gonna go
the
see
yeah.
it. I'm gonna see it. Am I gonna go see it, or am I gonna wait to see it until it comes out and I can watch it from the comfort of my own couch
Mhm.
or whatever?
Yeah.
I
I would
haven't
say
decided
IMAX
yet, but then
is yeah.
IMAX,
IMAX is pretty amazing for that. Yeah.
that feels like a lot of effort.
Yeah, true.
See, that's the
And
thing. That feels like a lot of effort, and I'm not sure anything that I've read or you've said makes me want to go out and see it, other than is it being professionally irresponsible for me to have not seen it? And if
I
anything,
think,
if I go out
yeah,
and see it, I feel like that's where I will fall into it. If I go out and see it and I make the effort, it's because I don't want to be professionally irresponsible to have not seen it. That's
yeah.
why I will go out and see it at this point.
It does annoy me now with movies when, because I love Interstellar, Christopher Nolan film. I saw that in
You
IMAX,
think
and then I
he's
saw
dead
it.
the whole time and it's just like some sort of like
Yeah,
purgatory?
I've heard that. I think, yeah, I watched it again, but I watched that again because I wanted to test that theory out, and I watched it not on IMAX, on a much, on my TV at home. Still very good, but it's annoying now that movies, it's like you have to, like with this film, I think you do have to go see it in IMAX. That annoys me a bit because a lot of people are going to stick this on their Apple TV player, when it comes out, and I'm sure it will still be fun. But it's like that some of what I saw, I'm not sure will translate when I watch it back on a TV, and that's annoying. That's just modern movies, right? That's not
Yeah.
the thing of F1, but that is frustrating. But I would say if you want the experience I saw, IMAX, and sit fairly close to the front, like I was, about halfway up, and you're just blown away at some of the scenes on there.
Are you gonna go
I
see
want
it?
to. I really want to hear when you guys have seen it. You come back at me and say what you say, because I feel like I'm just sitting on the fence with the movie. I cannot decide what I thought about it, if I'm completely honest. Like the movie goer in me was like, that was kind of entertaining, silly script, whatever. The F1 guy in me was like, don't be too much of a nerd here. But there's a lot of stuff that there's one thing that we can talk about when people have seen it that I think is actually, it's one thing they did very badly, and I think that doesn't reflect well on Formula One, and people who then go to Formula One will be like, oh, that's not normal. Like the way he goes racing is all I'll say. But
Okay.
again, it's Hollywood, right? So
All right. We need to,
yeah,
okay, this is what we'll
Spoiler
do.
territory.
We need to coordinate. Lawrence and I will have a conversation on WhatsApp because he actually communicates with me. We'll make a
yeah,
plan as to when we see it, and then we'll revisit this whole thing. So
okay,
That's good.
uh, yeah, we'll circle back on these things. We won't get to our podium predictions because obviously it's a weekend off, and we won't revisit what we did. But I think Laz and I both scored a point. I think we
I
did.
think so. I think I got Max in the right place. I don't mean anyone got the Mercedes.
No,
So
I
no,
think we
that's
both
right.
had Max in the right place. No, I don't think we did either. We won't talk about Nate because he's dead to me now. Uh, we'll see you again next week, guys at home, for watching, listening, whatever. Thank you very much for doing that. Remember, leave a comment, hit that like button, like and subscribe the ESPN F1 YouTube channel, because that's where you're going to find us all season long, all year long, for all of your F1 content. Hit us up with that 5-star review if you're listening someplace else. And remember, Unlapped is presented by Oracle. Right now, Oracle is offering to cut your current cloud bill in half if you move to OCI. See if your company qualifies at oracle.com/unlapped. Gentlemen, we won't speak to you soon, but I will see you in a week.